Welcome to the Three Phase Podcast. My name is Joe LaLeune, and today's guest is Leanne Taylor. She is currently the world number 3 for the Para-triathlon and is currently training for the Paris Olympics. She has had many trials and tribulations, and today we dive deep into her journey going from injured to elite athlete, and I hope you enjoy the conversation we had together. You get some insights into overcoming obstacles and challenges, whatever they are and whenever you may face them, understanding life's fragility, to be present and have fun. I hope you enjoy this one. Give Leanne a follow at LeaTaylor8 on Instagram. Today's episode is brought to you by 3phasefitness.ca for all of the training services that I'm offering, from in-person training to remote coaching. You can find all of them on the website, as well as this podcast, blog post, newsletters, and other programs and tips that are going to help you be successful with your health and fitness journey. Head to 3phasefitness.ca. Hit me up on Instagram at Joe LaLeune 3phase with any of your questions or advice that you'd like to receive. For now, enjoy the episode and enjoy your health and fitness.
The Three Phase Podcast is starting now.
All right, Leanne Taylor, welcome to the Three Phase Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have our conversation. We kind of got connected through a few different sources, and I was really interested in your story and just shedding some light on the different challenges that you've had and, you know, what you've really overcome to get where you are today, and want to dive deep into that and kind of dig in on the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
So let's give a little bit of background for listeners who maybe haven't met you before, where you ended up and how you are where you are currently.
Sure, yeah. So now I am a Canadian elite para-triathlete, and I'm trying to qualify at the moment for the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games, which is really exciting. But obviously, you take an interesting road to the Paralympics for most people. And so for myself, I was in a bike accident in 2018, and it wasn't a very high speed collision or anything overly exciting. I was just unfortunate, went over the handlebars and dislocated my back at T11, which meant that I was paralyzed from the waist down. So going from a very active lifestyle to anticipating life in a wheelchair meant a lot of big changes for me. And one of the things that really helped me to transition to life as a wheelchair user was getting into para sport. It started off as just something that I was doing for fun and to get some exercise, but then it became something that I really loved and was a passion of mine. And now I'm starting to develop it into a career, and I'm hoping to qualify for Paris 2024 and end up on the podium there. And hopefully it'll be the start of something big for myself in sport.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing a story. I know from the beginning it was, I mean, no one can anticipate anything like that. And you were just at that point just biking recreationally. That's right. It wasn't, or you weren't racing. Yeah. There was no high speed, like you said, and it was just sort of a bit of a freak accident that occurred. What was that like? I know. I mean, I can't imagine what that was like to go through that and sort of the process of realizing what had happened and the steps that you took to get to a space where you could start healing.
Yeah, I think for myself, the process was accelerated a bit by the fact that my fiance had actually just finished his PhD in spinal cord injury research.
Wow.
So he had graduated just a couple of months before I was injured. And the benefit of that, I suppose, in my sense, was that we knew what was happening from the beginning. Like even, from the moment when I hit the ground and didn't have sensation or movement in my legs, part of my brain was saying like, I know what this could be. And so in a lot of ways, a lot of people who have a spinal cord injury, a doctor has to come in and say to them, you're never going to walk again. This is what's going on. And for us, that wasn't as much of a surprise because we were able to sort of understand and start processing that early.
And was he with you there on the day?
Yeah, he was.
Oh, wow.
He was riding ahead of me on the trail.
So he kind of knew it was fresh in his mind from his education of how to handle the situation and make sure he's not, making any rash decisions or movements and things like that, and probably kept you as safe as you could be in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another aspect that sort of helped us to deal with what had happened is that we felt like we knew all of the best things to do to promote the best possible outcome, and we really did try them all. So, he spoke with the doctors about what strategies they were using, and then we went to an extensive rehab program to try to gain any function back that I might. And then once we were satisfied that we'd done everything that science supported and that the data supported, we could kind of put it to bed and say, okay, this is where we're at. We have to move on now.
Wow. Yeah. So the process that maybe most people would go through in a situation like that could take very extended long period of time was at least accelerated by information and the knowledge that you both had or you both learned together. I mean, that's a pretty amazing step in itself. Just, that's not even getting into the beginnings of this story, and you're already off to a different kind of start than other people may experience in similar situations. So once you've kind of come to accept that this is the new normal for you, what kind of things did you do or explore to enhance the life that you had now?
I think my biggest fear after the injury was that so many aspects of the life that I had built wouldn't be available to me anymore. And so, I was 25, so you work pretty hard to establish the career that you want, and you work pretty hard to establish, starting to get into hobbies more and starting to find out who you are and what you want to do with your time. And so big fears of mine were that those things would all have to change. Mm-hmm. And I remember meeting with a recreational therapist who was asking me, what do you like to do? And sport. It was the only answer. Yeah. And so I felt silly at the time saying that because I didn't think that I would be able to do that anymore. And then I found para-sport and obviously was very much wrong.
And what kind of activities did you like doing before?
So I had competed in triathlon, but in a very non-competitive sense, at a university club just for fun.
Yeah.
Volleyball was my favorite thing to do. Just loved it. Scott and I were doing some mountain biking, and we were just active. We weren't competitive per se at anything, but we just enjoyed to be out there and participating. So we ran a lot as well, but nothing elite.
Right. And what was the process like working with the recreational director to kind of figure out what you'd like to do or what you'd like to pursue, and how did that process go?
They sort of ask you different things that you're interested in and kind of try to line that up with activities that are available. In Manitoba, there isn't a lot of very established para-sport. And so how you get into sport is a lot of word of mouth from just other people who do it. And so when I was still in the hospital, actually, the recreation therapist took me to the track at the U of M to meet another athlete, Colin Matheson, who is a wheelchair racer. And when I was there, he was like, well, we have this other racing chair. You can hop in it if you want and kind of give it a go. And so at the time I was still living in the hospital, but, thought I'll just get in it and see what it's like to sit in it and spend a second, kind of feeling it out. And so I did a couple laps of the track and I was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do.
That's awesome. And so it came down a little bit to what was available and accessible, but maybe it just matched naturally for you and what you like doing and feeling in terms of what sport gives you back.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it was about finding a sport that made me feel powerful, and you don't always get that feeling as a wheelchair user. And so for myself, triathlon, being able to swim, bike, and run as a paraplegic is not something that you would know is even an option. And so in those races, every time you still feel so powerful that you can do it and accomplish it and race it and execute it at a high level.
Yeah, especially when it seems like there's so many elements that are involved in those three disciplines that it seems like there's so many areas where it couldn't be possible to do it, but then to actually be able to get out there and do the distances you have to cover and get in the water and swim, that I can only imagine that would feel like really empowering to be able to do that. And then not only just do those activities, but then also do them competitively, and then, cross a finish line and then compete at different levels. And now for you, like to be able to be in a position where you're very competitive for an Olympic spot, that must at least feel good.
Yeah, for sure. It does. It makes you feel athletic again. And like the person you were before you were injured is still there, just in a different way.
Yeah. The sense of competitive drive is tapped into again.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So what kind of support through Manitoba and other companies? I know you're working with Canada Life, that they were kind of stepped in and maybe were a good partner to help you find balance between your work and your training. And obviously having 3 disciplines is not like other sports where it's, you're just either doing team sport and you're practicing regularly and training. You have 3 very different disciplines to work on, and all of those things take time, and the different training modalities that you need for each of them. How did that come to play, and how did it get to a position where you felt like you could balance all those different things?
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. For myself, when I was injured, it was really important for me to go back to work because I had chosen a profession that I was passionate about. And it was sort of part of this internal checklist I had of things that I'm like, I can get this back, I can get that back. And so going back to work was one of those things. I wanted that back. And so I worked with Canada Life, who was my benefit provider at the time, to return to work in a way that made sense for me and that was sort of slow and gradual and really heavily supported by them and by my employer, Medicare. Mm-hmm. And then as I started to transition into sport, we just kept the channels of communication really open so that everybody understood that I still want to be able to contribute this to the company, but I also have these other goals, which I think can line up really nicely. Mm-hmm. And so those 2 companies went from just employer and benefit manager to being sponsors of me as an athlete as well. And so now it's so exciting that all of us together can potentially be on the podium in Paris and have done this together from the very beginning, which I think is really rare in a sponsor partnership, to have such a deep connection throughout someone's entire journey. So I'm really excited to be working with them.
Yeah, was that a bit unexpected for you, for them to, all those companies and of course family members and things like that too, to step up and be so supportive?
Yeah, for sure. I think every time we approach anyone with an ask, like for flexible work or asking for sponsorship or different kinds of support, we're completely surprised by how on board people get. But I think it's just this connection that people have to sport and to defying the odds. I think people want to be part of that team that was able to put that together for me, but just in general, for Canadian athletes, I think everyone can get behind what people are trying to do in accomplishing, getting to the games, and then also hopefully bringing home medals as well.
Yeah, I think it's just an amazing journey to want to be involved in and provide support where it's possible. I think it's really amazing to be able to do all those things that you need to do, and also to have the support that you need to do it. And I think up until a certain point, like, we're not even going based off of like performance, which is how most athlete sponsorship works. If you're a motocross athlete, you got to do some crazy flip before you get a Monster Energy sponsor, or you have to be, a hockey player who scores 50 goals to get a Nike sponsor. But for yourself and for less exposed sports, I would say too, it's a different journey, but it's pretty powerful and special to have those sponsorships step in and be right there from day one, right from the jump with you.
Yeah, I think the world of parasport there's less exposure and there's less opportunity for sponsors to, in some ways, to benefit from partnering with athletes. It has to be really not just based on exposure, but based on sort of this genuine connection. And I think people can get on board with the stories of para athletes in a way that makes people feel really connected. So I think that's kind of what it's been about, is just sharing a story that is true and dear to all of us, and seeing how successful that can become.
Mm-hmm. I had a pretty amazing experience a few years ago at the Pan Am and Para Ams that were hosted in Toronto. And I was working at the Velodrome Center and was on for the Para event after that too. During the Pan Am Games, there was lots of excitement. That venue was, the roof was going to come off it at times. People were so excited to be in there, and just great energy. Canadian set world records, all those great landmark things that happened in sport happened during those games. But the difference in the Para event was like, instead of being this like buzzy energy, it was like deep felt energy that was shared in the building. And it also was no longer about nations. It was about sports in general. So, Canadians were cheering for Colombians, and Americans were cheering for Cubans, and whatever else, whoever else was involved. It didn't matter even who they were representing. It was more about just getting behind the people that were involved in the sport, and to see and knowing their stories is a huge thing too, right? To know the stories and what people have gone through, even just to be in that space, not even competing, before they've put one pedal down, or they've taken one stride, or they've, rolled one wheel, anything like that. Before we've even taken to that point, everyone is already so happy and excited for the person themselves. And then to take it a step further and then start actually witnessing the sport and seeing how they do, seeing how they perform, and then seeing them win. There was not a dry eye in the production booth that I was a part of, because people just got so involved in the individuals. Right. So it's just such a special experience to be able to see people go through that journey. And for you, and hopefully for everyone, listening, and where we get exposure and where you get to meet more people, they get involved in your journey too. And they start to pay attention, and they watch how hard you train, and they see your trials as you get closer and closer to the games. And then when we get to see you compete at the games, we're going to be involved too and engaged in your story and everything that you're going to accomplish. But I think it's really special to be able to see all of that come to be, and then the success that comes out of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think para athletes in a lot of ways are doing a lot of the same things as the Olympic stream athletes in terms of, the training volume and the types of programs that we're doing. But I think the difference is the reason why. For the most part, you're not going to get rich from competing in para sport, but there has to be some other reason why you're putting in those hours. And for a lot of us, it's just that feeling of how much we can accomplish and being so committed to just loving sport. So it's definitely an environment that if someone hasn't been to, it would be great to have an opportunity, because it really changes your perspective on sport, I think.
It does completely. And would you say your root reason for this, is it just to feel that competitive nature again and sense of accomplishment, or do you have even bigger things that are the driving reasons for you?
I think when I think about why I compete in parasport, I always think about this group that I started swimming with. When I first started, I started swimming with a para swimming group, and there was like a really broad range of athletes. So some little kids with disabilities. And I remember, kind of getting introduced to parasport by them. And then the idea that I might then get to come back and show them a medal or show them what can be accomplished in parasport, I think would be so huge for me. For myself as a wheelchair user, one of the things that you don't see is a lot of role models. Like, you don't see a lot of moms who are wheelchair users and employees who are wheelchair users. You just don't have those same kind of role models. So the idea that I could be that for someone and show them what's possible is really what gets me excited to be there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think especially for the younger kids too, who don't have direct role models or people that they can look up to, mostly just because it's just not so prevalent in certain communities. And so to be able to have met someone, from the beginning, and then other people, of course, along the way will also see you and hear your journey, and also be inspired by that to do have their own journey, and maybe it's in sport or something different, but that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, I think so too. I think sport the main thing that we're also excited about when we're looking at sport is connection, and how much, having athletes represent your country and feeling what they're going through when you're watching them in the games. I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So what has the training been looking like for you? I know you said you normally do a morning session and then you're into an evening, you work and then you go into an evening session. So how's that looking right now? Maybe, we're in June, so we're probably in the middle of a season or getting close to it now.
Yeah, for sure. So we're racing in July of this year will be the first event towards qualification for the Paralympics. And it's going to be in Montreal. Nice. Which is exciting to have it on home soil. And so right now, I do 2 to 3 sessions a day. I usually swim and lift weights Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then the other days I'm either doing I do a bike and a run, which sometimes are together as a brick. And then sometimes they're split up. And then we kind of put in a few extra rides into that schedule just to make sure that I'm getting the volume on the bike, because that's the largest amount of time during the race is spent on the bike. Mm-hmm. So putting in, maybe three or so hours a day on an easier day. And then on the weekends, we're putting in quite a bit more than that, depending on what we're up to.
And for the biking, it's a hand cycle? Yeah.
So we swim in a typical sense, but we wear a leg brace on our knees. And then for the bike, we bike in a recumbent hand cycle, which is kind of like you're laying down and then you're looking down the barrel of it, sort of. And then in the racing chair, it's a kneeler. So you're kneeling forward. And then actually just the difference between the two is that for the bike, you have gears and that mechanical advantage. And then in the racing chair, you're just pushing with your hands on the push rims of the wheelchair itself. So you're not using gears.
Some of those positions are different than any other sport. And I'm curious, especially about the kneeling portion of that, because you're so, hunched over and you're using only arm power, obviously. How much time did that take to get used to that position and start to build some capacity there?
Yeah, the position takes a bit of time to get comfortable in. It's definitely one of those things where you get out and you're like, oh, my back. But it was the thing that I just took to the most naturally, actually. Mm-hmm. I was really lucky that when I started, I got to go to a training camp with para-athletics in Florida. And so from the very beginning, I was taught how to push the racing chair properly, which is something that in sport is really a unique experience, I think, as a para-athlete, because most of the time, if you've come up through sport, you've learned from, say you're playing baseball, you've learned from your little league coach and someone's dad and maybe your own parents, and you have bits and pieces of technique, but they might not necessarily be all correct. And so you have a lot of bad habits. Right. And so for myself, I felt like, going right into learning from the national team's track coach, I did it right from the beginning. And so then it really just clicked for me and felt really good right from the start.
And that was the first chair that you got in when you went to the track?
Yeah, I felt comfortable in my first chair, but when I got an upgrade, I was definitely much faster.
Yeah. And it probably is helpful to have no habits going into something like that, and just learning from the absolute best and then them showing you the technique and then just building on that.
Yeah, it's a unique opportunity, but I think it benefited me for sure.
And which is the most challenging portion of the triathlon for you?
For me, it's definitely the bike. I think you can't fake it on the bike. And people say this all the time, but I just didn't like to hear it in the beginning. But it's just hours in the saddle. And I think it's the same on a hand cycle. Yeah. You just have to spend a certain amount of time building those muscles. And that was frustrating for me because I wanted kind of the shortcut, what's the technique on this? How can you build this faster? But it's just been a matter of patience, which isn't my favorite answer, but we're getting there.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's one of those things too, where it's just time, repetition, practice, and I'm sure it takes a lot of that. What would you say you're getting in kilometers in a week on the bike?
That's a good question. Our race is 20K, and that takes about 40 minutes. And maybe we do 6 hours of riding a week. Okay. I'm not great at math.
Neither. I won't do that off the top of my head. Maybe my embarrassment, but it's a lot of time, we'll say.
Yeah, decent
That's
amount.
a lot of time. So once you started doing the triathlon, doing it competitively, you had some success early, right?
Yeah. I did, but I also had some pretty big disappointments in the beginning that I suppose, from the outside, it doesn't look like a disappointment, but to me, it really was. Mm-hmm. So like my first world championships, we were still learning about my bike and we'd made a mistake in the way that we'd set it up. And so one of the things that you can see while you're riding is the power on your bike. And so at my first world championships, I'm seeing this huge power and I'm feeling like, I should be going so fast, but I'm looking at my speed and it's really, really slow. And I'm not really sure what the discrepancy is. And so I finished my first worlds, was super disappointed because it just wasn't the performance I'd wanted to have. And then we had to go back and realize and make those changes. And so I think for sure I've had a good intro to sport. It has been like I've started pretty quickly, but at the same time, there's definitely like as you're learning some big bumps in the road and frustrations that you don't see when you just look at someone's kind of history in sport.
Yeah. And so even though it was a learning opportunity, it was early on, it was still, you're competitive by nature.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to break away from that. With right from the rehab portion into sport, it sounds like you're extremely goal oriented. And what were some of the early goals that you set for yourself versus some of the more recent goals that you've set for yourself?
One of my first big goals after I was injured, we went to like a separate rehab facility and we were going to stay there for a month. And so part of the reason was to explore possible functional gains. And so the idea was that we were going to try to go here and maybe walk again, maybe regain some function again, and really commit to that for the month. And then if we saw absolutely no gains, we could kind of close that chapter and leave it alone and move on with our life. Mm-hmm. But as a side goal to that, one of the things that we wanted to do while we were there is learn how to transfer from the ground into my day chair.
Right.
And so the real motivation for doing that is that I could go swimming by myself when I could do that. And so that was one of the big things in the beginning that seemed impossible at first. And then over time I was able to do it. And that kind of led me into triathlon because there's a certain amount of independence that I would need if I was going to be able to train on my own.
Right. And just like a standard triathlon, there's a transition from one discipline to the next. And it's an important part, right? That's where a lot of people make or break their race. And so is that advantageous to have that as like one of your first goals, is to really dive in on that and work hard to get successful at it? For
sure. We actually, in transition, we are allowed to have a handler. And so that person actually assists us to kind of get from one piece of equipment to the other. And that's allowed for just the wheelchair class. And I think part of it is because there's different impairments that go into the wheelchair class. And so to kind of make a more even playing field, those of us like myself who would benefit from having support during transition are able to. And so my partner, Scott, actually does that for me. Nice. Yeah. So it makes it really fun that he gets to be part of the race. And it's also, I don't envy his position, just standing there waiting and then having to like work really hard for 1 minute. But he's good.
Should guess the over under on how many times he looks at his watch to see how your pace is going before you get there.
I always say I want to put a heart rate monitor on him because I think that it would be comparable to me actually racing, just him stressing out in the box.
Yeah, you should do that. That would be a pretty funny side-by-side heart rate comparison. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure he's just as nervous when you get started. So that was an early goal. I think for a lot of people who are newly in wheelchairs, that's a big one, right? Like being able to gain back that independence, being able to get yourself from, one seat to another, or get out of your chair and sit, somewhere else on a couch or chair or whatever it is. That's a big thing. And it's a big landmark.
Yeah, it's a big life changer. The more you're able to do those kind of things and be independent, for sure.
Do you think that's probably the not the transition, but the regaining some sense of independence is a big hurdle to overcome and to get to, and once you've achieved it, it does kind of give you more confidence back, or whatever the adjective there might be, whether it's confidence or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being able to live your life independently is, I mean, not a goal that everybody is able to achieve, and that's okay. But I think whatever aspect of that you can achieve is really helps you to be confident and helps you to feel like you're making your own choices and you're kind of in the driver's seat on your life. And so the way that we've learned and adapted now, I can get up in the morning, drive myself to my training, do my training on my own, come home and do all of those things for the most part independently, which makes a big difference just in terms of your confidence and your ability to kind of set goals and make choices if you're the one that's able to execute on those things.
Yeah. So now into sport, you've got the base sense of how to do it. What were some of the first goals that you set for yourself with the triathlon?
Well, my first triathlon, I had registered for it. And so to finish it, I would have finished just 8 months after my injury, which was a pretty ambitious goal. I was actually working with Triathlon Canada's para coach. She does some development work. And so she had sort of set this goal for me to do this race. And I remember going there and feeling just like, how in the world am I going to pull this off? And I'm in front of all of these people. Like it matters more. Like they're sort of evaluating my potential as an athlete. Right. And I'm not trying to look confident, but I'm not even sure that I'm going to finish.
Sure. I have no idea how it's going to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, for me, this season that I was training in Manitoba was winter. And so my first race I did in March. And so I hadn't been outside on my bike ever. My first time outside on my bike was actually during the course familiarization for the race.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I was really nervous. But I finished that race and it was just like the most amazing, most satisfying feeling. And from there, I was like, this is what I want to do. I love this.
You're hooked in. Yeah, that's a challenge in itself. I mean, I don't even think I would get on a bike in March in Manitoba. I hold off till mid-June to start biking. That's pretty impressive. And I mean, I can't imagine the emotion after finishing that and having, did you have much expectation for the race or just didn't even know what to expect?
I just wanted to finish. I so badly wanted to finish. I remember getting to the run and as I said, the run's always the part that I felt confident on, and getting into the racing chair and being like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to finish it. And just being so excited. It wasn't even done yet, but I was at this point, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And now I feel like every time I get into the racing chair, I feel like that energy is kind of carried over. And so every time I get in, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is it. Full out.
And that's the last stage, and is that the most confident piece of the race?
Yeah, for myself for sure. And because I'm not so fast on the bike, I often have to do quite a bit of catching up on the run. And so I find myself every time I get into the race, just being so pumped to chase down the finish line.
Yeah, that's insight. You're just give it your all at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing to lose.
That's awesome. And what have some of your more recent goals that you've set been?
So right now, I'm actually ranked third in the world rankings going into, starting the qualifications for the games, which is really exciting.
Very.
Yeah, thanks.
Very
and
exciting.
At World Championships last year, I came fourth. And so there's always that toss up, between fourth is a rough place to be because you've accomplished so much to get there, but you're just one seat off the podium. Yeah. And so I guess the real goal for me going into Paris is to establish myself on that podium, going into the races for this year and for next year, just to know what it feels like and to start earning those podiums so that by the time Paris comes around, I'm confident that that's where I'm going to be.
Nice. How many races do you have before the maybe final qualifier?
It's a little bit, the way that it works is a bit unique. So our qualification is a 1-year period of time when the qualifications are open, and the individuals who are ranked in the top 9 at the end of that, so in a year from now in July, will be the athletes that get to go to the games. And so we have, there's different races that you can choose to get your points, and different races are worth more points. And so the races that are worth the most is Montreal coming up in July. And then for myself, then I'll be racing the next week in Long Beach. And then we'll be racing World Championships, which is in Spain. And we'll do the test event this year. So we'll get to actually race the Paris Paralympics course, which will be fun. Yeah. And then hopefully by then, we'll start to see where we're lining up in terms of points. And there becomes a certain point if you're doing well enough where you couldn't possibly get bumped. And so we're hoping to see that leading into next year, so that next year is all about training and not about qualifying anymore.
Yeah, nice. You want to take some of that pressure off and just get dialed in and focused on what you have to do. Is one of the races on the F1 track? Did I hear that too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Montreal will be racing on the F1 track, which is always a sweet course.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then the swim portion of that is just obviously slightly off-site somewhere.
Yeah, it's in a rowing basin. So in Montreal, the F1 track, the rowing basin and the F1 track are actually like sort of connected. And so we'll be able to swim in the rowing basin and then hop on the F1 track for the bike and run, which is my favorite because I don't love a technical course. I like to be able to give her. So the F1 tracks are always fun for me.
It's a little more predictable when you know how the track is laid out.
Yeah, for sure.
So leading through the season, obviously you want to have some great finishes. Of course, that's the goal all the way through. What's the travel like for you? I mean, you mentioned a few different places, Long Beach and Spain, and what's that experience like traveling for sport? You know, is that something that you did before in any type of capacity, you know, whether it was volleyball or something else? And is this a new thing that because you're now elite in sport that you're traveling more globally?
Yeah, for sure. Like I had traveled quite a bit. I actually grew up in the UK, and so I'd traveled a little bit more than maybe typical, just being closer to different countries, living there. But my fiance, actually, the first time that he had been outside of North America was to travel for triathlon. So yeah, it's definitely a different experience. We've been to a lot of places that I wouldn't have otherwise necessarily gone. So like we raced last year, our World Championships was in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. And we raced most recently in Yokohama in Japan.
Cool.
Yeah, it's been like an opportunity to see places that I never would have expected to go and kind of learn what places I'm like, oh yeah, I would go there again versus places that I'm like, no, it's okay.
Once was good. That's pretty amazing. And it is the sort of the universal like gatherer sport. So it's very cool to have, you know, be in places that are foreign languages and you're not speaking anything the same other than the sport itself. So to be somewhere like Japan and everyone sort of is on the same page doing the same thing is kind of a cool experience too. Yeah, for sure. And once you sort of get to the elite level, the number of athletes that you see at the races, because entry into races is based on world ranking. So the more desirable races, the top athletes will get to go to. And so you start to see the same girls at each of the races and form friendships with some of the girls who speak English and you can have a good connection with, and then some who it's all just, you know, signs and smiles, but you get very familiar with who you're going to see and probably who you're going to go to the games with. So it's kind of cool in that way. Right. It's kind of a community within itself. Yeah. Can you break down some of the different categories for different like abilities in the sport itself? Because that is different compared to what most people are exposed to for sports. Like, you know, in hockey, there's no categorization based on, you know, anything specific, but in parasport there is. Can you break some of that down for people? Yeah, for sure. So parasport is classified into different classes based on a person's physical ability. And so for triathlon, there's 5 standing classes. So different levels of impairment for standing athletes. So like athletes with, say, just a hand amputation would be in a different class from athletes who have, say, a high leg amputation. And then there's a wheelchair class, which is the class that I compete in. So our defining characteristic is just that we race with the racing chair and the hand cycle. And so within that class, then there's two classes. And the way that it works is I'm WC1. And so our group starts first. And then athletes who are less impaired have a time disadvantage. So they literally wait on the start line and then chase us down. Wow. And so that's the way that they try to have more athletes competing in that same
pool, but to make it fair amongst them. And then there's also a class in triathlon for visually impaired athletes, which is the coolest to me, because they race with a guide. And so these athletes, some of them, including one of the athletes on my team, are completely blind, can't see a thing, and trust someone else to guide them through the course, which I think is just such an amazing partnership and really impressive to watch.
Mm-hmm. And so they have a running guide, and then they bike tandem, and then they're swimming with a guide as well.
Tethered, they have like a rubber tether, and they put it on, each of them puts it on their legs, so the guide and the athlete. And that's how they can feel their distance apart in the swim. Right.
Whole different type of challenge. I think to be able to have more or less a level playing field for everyone, to have a big pool of athletes. Do you see a lot of winners do they typically come out of one of those categories, or is it just, it totally depends who's there and who's competing and what happens on the day?
So there's medals for each of the different standing classes, and then there's medals for VI athletes, and there's medals for wheelchair athletes. But within VI and wheelchair, there's those different starts. And so we're competing for the same medal, but athletes with less impairment than me are starting later, but competing for the same medal. So the idea is that they would like chase down the athletes who start first. So the nice thing about the way that it's arranged is that whoever crosses the finish line, that's the winner, and it's clear. But I can't imagine what it's like just sitting on the line there waiting to get started. That must be a special feeling.
adding more antsiness to an antsy situation.
Exactly.
What do you think has been the biggest highlight for you so far? And maybe it's not sport, maybe has more to do with the sort of early change and development.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think my most recent race was such a mix of like the best and worst that can happen in racing. And I feel like it has to be the answer. And so when I was racing in Japan for the first time against the most competitive field, I was on the run and a few meters behind third place, and, really trying to close in on this athlete and feeling like it was pretty possible. And then I went around a corner and crashed. Oh, no. And in the finish chute. So it was like, the last possible kind of minute. And I was so disappointed. And then an athlete went ahead of me, and then I ended up finishing fifth when I was kind of gunning for third. And that's what I was hoping to achieve. And after the race, one of the other athletes came up to me, and she had been talking to my teammates earlier, and they had said that when she was talking to them and telling them that I crashed, that she had tears in her eyes, and that she was just so disappointed for me that I had gotten into that situation, past her and then crashed. And I think it's just things like that really make you realize the impact that you're making in your community, that other athletes care so deeply about each other and feel each other's pain in that way and connect on that level. And I think that's kind of the best part of it for me, is that, you do whatever you do in sport and you accomplish whatever you accomplish, but you stay so much in like the minds of those people who you really influenced. And so in the same way that I'm meeting those people all the time and just being amazed by my competitors and the people that I'm surrounded by, it's nice to think that you're making that impact on someone else as well.
Yeah, even though you're competing against one another, you still want the best for each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so unique about parasport, that it is so fiercely competitive, but at the same time, there's nobody else in the world who has been through anything so similar to your experience as your competitors. So it kind of brings you together in that way too.
It transcends sport.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's always so interesting to watch. And I think you could probably speak to this. A lot of athletes will compete with a chip on their shoulder, or they'll find some sort of deep motivation, something that's going to get them to push extra hard in the last, few minutes or few miles or whatever it is. Do you feel like that's something that's easy to tap into, or there are good examples for you that you can really lean on when those moments are hard, and like after a crash, to get up and finish, like those kind of things? Do you feel like the drive to do that is more present?
I think in a lot of ways you feel so much like you owe it to yourself. Like you've done so much to get there that every time you go into a race, you're like, this is just the cherry on top. And so when you go into a race, you're like, feel like you want to go out and get what you've earned. And you know how hard you've worked to be there and how much the odds were stacked against you. And I think that makes you that much more hungry for the win or for whatever position you're fighting for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the amount of time and hours you put into it, and then probably the community that's you're surrounded with, who's also wants you. They just obviously want you to do what you want to do, and make sure that you are as successful as you want to be. And then it extends even beyond that, right? Having even just your competitors be in similar situations and wanting you to be and themselves obviously to be competitive and be successful for whatever that means for you. I think you and your team obviously know exactly what that is.
Yeah, I think that in the para community, there's just so much respect for sport and what it means to everyone who's there and the effort that everyone puts in. It's a beautiful place to be.
Did anything change? Like you've sort of donned the maple leaf at this point at the Worlds. Did anything change when you got to put that jersey on compared to maybe some of the other shirts you've worn in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a humbling experience to represent all the different people who've helped you on your way. And like I said, my family moved to Canada when I was 10. And so I always say that I'm Canadian by choice, which I think means a lot to me. And so getting to have my first Team Canada kit felt super cool. But I also felt a lot of responsibility as well to perform at the level that I wanted to. So it's a blessing and a curse, but I'm always proud to wear it.
Yeah, I bet that's a pretty not unexpected, but maybe from where things started, it was much more unexpected.
Yeah, for sure.
And what's the team like? What's the Canadian team like for track and triathlon, and how does that group get along?
We're lucky in the sense that in parasport, triathlon's an individual sport. But because we're all in different classes, we aren't competing against each other with the current team that we have. And so it's so nice in the sense that we can train in the same environment and just be absolutely excited for each other and never have any other feeling.
Right.
And so I think it's always a complicated place to be if you're in, say, elite triathlon in any country, because your training partners and your teammates are also your competitors and you're competing for spots. And so our team is lucky that we're in different classes. And so we just get to be absolutely excited for each other. They recently added a relay to para-triathlon. And so they're having that for the first time in the games in 2028. So if we're still around, that'll be something that we might get a chance to do. And then we really will be a team and get the opportunity to race together, which would be cool.
And so one person would do each leg.
You would think.
It's not like that?
No, it would make a lot of sense. But actually, each person does a short leg of each sport. So it's swim, bike, run times 4.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're cutting the distance right down.
Yeah.
Would it be it would be a faster finish, right? Because everyone's going to kind of go all out in their section. Yeah,
exactly. It's a super fast finish. It's basically a sprint in each sport. Right. I mean, maybe already is close, but it's really just an absolute full out race for each person. And then once your last person is done, your team is finished. So it's the way that it starts, because logistically it's a little bit confusing. So the wheelchair athletes go first. And so once I finish the run, we'll have a flag, like a team flag, and then they'll put that flag down that will tell my athlete that's on the dock to go for their swim that they can start. Okay. And so it continues like that.
And so that may be at the
2028.
Gotcha. But not in Paris.
So I don't know that they're going to, at World Champion, that's what I was going to say. At World Championships every year so far, they've been trialing it. And I think this year will be the first year that it counts for points. So it has value and has medals attached to it. But in 2028 will be the first time that it's actually in the Paralympics.
Very cool. Very cool. Just gives you something to be competitive at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But an opportunity to do it as a team as well.
Yeah.
Was there any exploration of team sports when you were, trying to figure out what you might like to focus on?
Yeah, I got a chance to do a lot of very cool sport. And if you ever get a chance to try any of these, I definitely recommend it. It's a really good time. So I tried out wheelchair basketball. I'm just terrible. Just not great at it. Then I played sledge hockey, which is really fun. Then I have a friend who's kind of trying to teach me the ropes, but again, it's
also very challenging.
Yeah. I don't really want to be hit. I don't really want to hit anybody. I'm okay.
Yeah. I worked at a sled hockey tournament. I think it was like Worlds or something like that.
No, cool.
Those guys are violent. They are violent. They're going full on into each other, and they're more competitive than the hockey players. I think so.
It's absolutely savage. Yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, I love triathlon, and for sure it's what I want to do now. I think maybe in the long run, I would do a little bit of track as well. Like I've done a bit of racing in track in the past, but didn't really have time to keep up with it. But for sure, I'd like to try a little bit of marathon and kind of see how I do in some of those longer distance track races too. But I just can't give up the swimming for now.
Yeah, that's great. So it's definitely has become your passion, the trio.
Yeah, it's so nice because you can fall out with one thing, but not have fallen out with your sport altogether. Right. And I think that happens a lot.
And you've been involved too in introducing other people to sport too, right? And what's that been like, kind of being a mentor for other people to start to find their passion or get their competitive edge back in whatever it might be?
I love having the opportunity to expose other people to sport. I think it's hard at times to see the positive. When you're first injured, it's hard to see opportunities and things that you get to experience that you otherwise don't. But one of the things that I think people really feel is that they do get this chance to try all of these sports again and to try all of these different things and to be new and to learn and to develop in a way that you just very often don't as an adult, whether it's that you've either experienced things before or more likely that you just not many people as an adult, if you don't know how to swim or don't know how to skate, are going to go and learn. And so I think being injured kind of shakes things up and gives you a chance to say, okay, I want to try some new things and put yourself out there. And so I love being involved with athletes who are just learning sport because I think you get to be with them while they experience something for the first time kind of again, which is exciting.
Yeah, that is definitely a commonality where, people really get settled into the things they do or like doing. And I mean, you could ask probably 100 people who are 30 plus if they've done anything new recently, and it would be a pretty small number who have said, oh yeah, I try new things all the time. So to be able to get exposure to stuff, I mean, probably a lot of stuff that people didn't even know existed, right? Like whether it's, I know, archery is one. People may have not have ever thought of that as a sport before, or triathlon or swimming or sledge hockey, right? Like maybe you're aware of them, maybe even just subconsciously aware of them, but to actually have the opportunity to meet with someone who is very well versed in that thing and to help you learn about it and teach you the skill that goes into it is probably a pretty bright light for most people, when they're not sure how this thing is going to turn out and how things are going to move forward. To have someone who's excited, I'm sure for a lot of conversations and interactions, it's not always high excitement. It's a lot of reality. So to be around people who are really excited about something that you can do is probably, like I said, like a very bright light and leads you in a good direction again.
Yeah, I think it also takes you to this place where, like, if you hear the way that para athletes can laugh at themselves and kind of by extension each other in their impairments, it just like creates this sense of like lightness that you otherwise wouldn't have. Right. And so like if someone were to watch me in public, like kind of messing up a transfer or looking like I was having a hard time with something, they wouldn't laugh because that would seem like a horrible thing to do. But like if my friends in parasport were to watch me like messing up a transfer, they would laugh, they would film it, they would make fun of you. Absolutely.
They would tell you.
Yeah. And then they would teach me. But I also think it just brings a sense of like lightness, and you're not taking yourself so seriously. And in the time that you're injured, everything is serious and everyone is sad. And all of those things are totally understandable, but it's just such a gift for someone to like poke fun and like be a little bit more light about such a kind of dark situation.
Yeah, especially if you're meeting people who are maybe further into their journey, or they've gone through the different stages of whether it's grief and development and actualization to this is what it is now, and this is how I live my life, and I know exactly what I'm capable of doing, and I'll do it to its fullest. You meet those people who are pretty established in their position, and those guys and gals know how to poke fun where they can. It seems like they take their opportunities with a big smile on to make sure that you're not taking yourself too seriously, and that you do find the fun in things again.
Yeah, absolutely. Recently, we were at a training camp with one of the athletes on my team who's completely blind, and we decided that we were going to try to teach her how to sink a basketball. And it's just one of those things where like normally people wouldn't suggest that to her because they would feel too uncomfortable or they wouldn't think it was funny, but she thought it was hilarious, and we all just got to kind of make light of like this thing that she previously couldn't do, but in an environment that was accepting, maybe she can.
And did she?
Yeah.
Yes, she did. Yeah. Of course. Yeah, you can't forget that people who have an impairment are all of a sudden a different person than they were before. Like, just like you like to laugh and have fun and, and try new things and poke fun and have people make fun of you too. That's not something that just all of a sudden changes. Like you got to have those opportunities and the space to do it. And sport is a good spot for that. There's always, chirping and making fun of happening all the time. Always, obviously, or not always, but most of the time it's meant to be lighthearted and change the mood of an environment, or, help you relax while you're waiting on the finish line for your class to start. Someone throws a joke out there or whatever it is. But sport is very good at doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Just changing the environment and letting people have a laugh in a situation when maybe they otherwise wouldn't.
Right. Do you think you're having fun with the sport?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that like before I was injured, I would have just taken it seriously and been super serious. And I think now I can be serious about sport and what I want to accomplish, but then also sit back and say like, why am I doing this? If it's not fun, it's a waste of time. And so I think we bring a lot of that into sport.
And a good perspective shift for all athletes is to just have better balance between those two things. Of course, there's lots of times to be dialed in and serious about it, but also to maybe just have perspective on what you're doing. Like you're doing a sport for enjoyment, to be competitive, but also to have, an outlet, to be a part of a community, to have fun in a different way. And you probably have the best perspective on sport, knowing that, the pull of things can be really, really serious and deep and heavy. And the other end of that can be really light and fun. So you probably have a better perspective than most people when it comes to sport. Kids are taking sport very seriously at a very young age, and they think that's their life and that's all it's going to amount to. And we know that the percentage of athletes who make it, all the way, and they do that for their lifetime, is pretty small. So you got to have fun and enjoy moments and not take yourself so seriously all the time. But
yeah, I think the reality is when you've had an accident like mine, you realize how fragile your existence is. And so every time you approach anything, it just becomes a matter of like, I can do this now. And so I'm going to make the most out of it at this time, because you never know how long you're going to be able to do something or what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm. Does that give you a maybe not a better sense, but a sense of presence?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just makes you take little things less seriously and pursue things that you want more aggressively, because there's really just no sense in not.
Yeah. Do those things seem very clear to you now?
Most of the time. Yeah.
Of course. There's always other things that come up that are challenging and you got to navigate them too, but probably seems a bit easier where not to spend energy.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a great conversation. I feel like we touched on some amazing things, and you've got a big season coming up that I am really excited to pay attention to and watch. And we'll make sure that in the show notes, everyone will see your Instagram handle and they can follow you and see all your training and competition coming up in the next year. Is there any other ways that people can support you or just be engaged and involved with your journey over the next couple of years leading to Paris?
No, I think that's it. Following along my journey on Instagram, I actually started raising money for Can Fund as well, which is a charity that supports Canadian athletes who are podium potential athletes going into the games. And so that's linked in my Instagram as well. And that's a good way that you can support me, but also other Canadian athletes and help us to bring home some medals from 2024.
That's perfect. We'll share that in the show notes too, so that if people do want to make a donation, it's easy find and they can go right to that website and help Leanne and others get to the games and bring home some hardware.
Perfect. Thanks.
Well, Leanne, it's been amazing talking to you. We wish you the best of luck in the next couple of years, and we will be watching.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great getting to meet you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. This episode was brought to you by 3phasefitness.ca for all your health, fitness, nutrition, advice, programs, and services. You can head to 3phasefitness.ca, explore that page, find what you need, reach out to me on Instagram at Joe LaLeune 3phase. Let's get in touch and get you to your goals sooner. I appreciate you all for listening to the episode today. And until next time, we'll see you soon.